Hi everyone, my name is Angelica and I'm here with Tiffany and Akua today for the second part series on leadership. And today we're going to talk about the cycle of toxic leadership and also how to break it. And so I'd be really interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. Why do you think that there is this cycle of leadership, and how would you describe it to somebody who may be thinking, well, what is that? Tiffany, what do you think?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that actually, because someone sent in a question from our video that we posted our snippet last week. And one of the reasons I think that happens is leaders not being comfortable with their team, maybe having more expertise than they do. And we talked about that last week, but someone asked a question around how do you handle a leader who has more experience, who maybe doesn't value you? And I think a lot of that plays into this, where people have these insecurities, they're not self-aware, like we talked about last week. And it really makes a difference in how the environment is. Leaders drive that culture, and it's really establishing what your leadership brand is. And if you can't do that, or you can't take yourself out of the equation and put your ego aside, that can create a whole lot of toxicity.
Mhm. What do you think, Akua?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, Tiffany. This idea of leaders really recognizing that they have an impact on whether or not people want to be there. I'm sure all of you have heard that quote that says something along the lines of, people don't leave companies. They leave, I think it says managers, but I think we should actually focus on they leave leaders, because it's leaders that are really driving the culture, as Tiffany already alluded to. So in my mind, a lot of times it really just comes down to, what does success look like to that leader? And it's not always an easy conversation to have. And sometimes a leader doesn't want to budge. But just helping a leader recognize that by being able to retain employees or keep employees motivated and engaged will have a positive impact on their bottom line, sometimes can help shift that behavior. Sometimes it doesn't. And then maybe it's, you have to ask yourself, like, is this really the right place for me in the long term? But I think it really does sort of begin with you recognizing that, okay, do I really want to be here? Is this really where I see myself long term? And then also recognizing that you can remove yourself. And I know that, saying it might sort of come from sort of a place of privilege to some extent, but if a situation really isn't working to your benefit, you can always think about what else is possible. What else can I do apart from this situation?
Yeah, I like that. And I think, a lot of times what we find is that leaders sometimes adopt the same aspects or the same traits as past leaders. So I think, like Tiffany said, being really self-aware is important, to understand if you are perpetuating that cycle, because we may bring things from our past that we're not recognizing, or even from our upbringing, or even how we were initially kind of groomed when we first came into the workplace. And so often we see that leaders tend to repeat and perpetuate the same type of leadership that they experienced early on in their career. And so I think it is important to be self-aware and to understand that you can unlearn things, because just because it was that way in the past doesn't mean it has to continue that way in order to be successful. You have new generations in the workplace, you have generations, combined with each other. And I think it's a really fine balance of trying to be a leader and fulfill the processes, but also keeping people engaged, like you said, Akua. I definitely agree. And somebody brought up a good point of, well, what do you do if leadership is not upholding healthy boundaries? And so I thought that was really interesting, because you may actually come to the workplace as a healthy human being. You may be emotionally intelligent, you may be self-aware, but there's only so much you can do when you encounter a leader who is actually exhibiting toxic, unhealthy traits. So how do you suggest that people kind of address that situation, and really try to work with the leader in a way that will be beneficial for both?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think from an HR perspective, it's, if you're comfortable having that conversation, I am a huge advocate of just hitting it head on. I don't believe in elephants in the room. I'm always talking about chalking them out. I think that it's really important to have that dialogue, one, to set and manage expectations, because you want to make sure that you're on the same, kind of playing field. And if not, then that conversation becomes extremely critical, because you have to set healthy boundaries. We are at work many of the hours of the day, and if you're not vibing with your boss or they're mistreating you, that's not cool. And it's perfectly okay to manage up and to say that to them respectfully, tactfully. But people, they get in this position of power, and there's this abuse of power that becomes, and so people will shrink and they won't say anything to their leaders, because that's my manager, I can't say that. What will happen? I will be retaliated against. So if you can't directly talk to that person, I would advise to talk to your HR department, pull another leader in, someone else who can be an advocate for you. I'm a huge advocate for using your voice, and I understand that some people are uncomfortable with that, but there's so many resources. You can use your employee assistance plan, or we loving them shorten it to EAP. That's a great resource as well, but don't sit in that silence and sit in an environment where you feel like someone's encroaching on your boundaries and they're not healthy boundaries, and feel like you just have to suck that up. I did it for many, many years. Like, well, that's the boss, I can't say anything. Well, or I'm HR, I have a complaint. Well, who do I go to? And so it's always finding someone who can support you within the office, within your network, within healthcare, to make sure that you just don't sit with that silence in these toxic environments.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's super important to look at who you have in your corner as well. And I'd love to hear what you think, Akua. What would you suggest to somebody who maybe is having issues with their boss, and setting those boundaries, and steps to protect themselves too? Because I think that's another concern is, well, if I say something to my boss, or if I go to their boss, or if I go, then maybe like Tiffany said, I'll get retaliated against. So how would you suggest people approach the situation and protect themselves?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think it really starts with the type of organization you work for. So my background is working for fast growing startups, which are notorious for having a lack of boundaries, right? If anything, right? It's all about, working fast, working hard, breaking things, failing. And sometimes that can lead to incredibly toxic environments if left unchecked over long periods of time. I'm sure, we can all think of startups, and something can come to mind about something that went awry in terms of engaging with employees and managing employees or employee wellness. So my first thought really is to recognize that you do have a right to express your concerns. And I think that it's first and foremost recognizing that, because so many of us, when we first start off, think that, we can't have a voice, we can't really talk about things, we just have to take it. You can have a conversation. A lot of times leaders don't even recognize how they're coming across, because they're not necessarily emotionally intelligent. They're not necessarily self-aware. So if you feel comfortable having that conversation, first and foremost, if you're a leader directly, I would encourage you to do so, but also recognize that they might not be ready or willing to listen to you. So making sure that you set the tone, that you're allowing them, the time to process the information that you're going to share, and then recognizing that, they might dismiss it initially. So just walking into that situation and just trying to have a conversation, so you understand that you're coming from the point of view of that this makes the most sense for you. And at the end of the day, if you are engaged, you feel mobilized, you're excited to do your work, that has a positive impact on the bottom line of the company. If you're within a company that's a little bit more structured, you might already have sort of tools and techniques in place to support you. So I would definitely say that you check those out. So if you have an employee handbook, you have an HR person that you can reach out to, that you have that conversation with them to prepare for it. Because once again, it's not always the easiest thing to do. But I would say that that first step really is trying to have a direct conversation with your boss. I always say try and document things. So, follow it up with an email. Thank them so much for their time. Add a timeline if they said that they want to actually, have a think about it and would want to get back to you, right? So try and put in an email, try to sort of have that document in place that you both agree on what the next steps look like and sort of what success looks like for both of you at the end of the day. So I think those are some of the initial things that I would suggest. But, you know, just start with yourself and really recognize what's important to you, and that what's important to you should be important to your company. Of course, don't go overboard with it, but just really recognize that even as an individual, you are really important.
Yeah, I love that. I think, a lot of people don't understand their own power as an employee, and there is still power as an employee, and you still have a voice, and you still have a right to know what your rights are in the workplace. And so I love that you said that. And I think, another thing that people often wonder is, how do these cycles of leadership keep getting perpetuated? Why aren't organizations figuring this out where, they're stopping this cycle and making something better? And so I'd love to hear, a little bit more about what you guys think about why this seems to be continuing. It's 2020, and we are very well aware that a lot of workplaces are still having these problems. And it takes times of crisis like now for them to come fully into light. And so I'd love to hear what you guys think about why this seems to be continuing and what you think that companies can do to try to mitigate that. Tiffany?
A lot of it, I think it's the egos. And I also have seen, and I am very keenly aware that there is avoidance, and there is pretending that these things don't happen because we don't want to look bad. The optics around it are not great. We don't want, this person, maybe they do positively impact the bottom line. And so we can't have someone thinking this, or they're just afraid to have the tough conversation of, listen, this is not good leadership and you don't have an engaged team. One of the things too is metrics. What are your metrics around performance, engagement? And some organizations struggle to put that in. They have this loosey-goosey strategy, if there even exists. And that does not help our leaders succeed. They often get left behind by the process, by the organization, by these systems that have failed them because no one's mentoring them. I had a boss once who was struggling. They were not a good leader. And do you think that trickled down to the team? Our team was solid. Our team actually could have run this team. And this leader knew that, and it became a threat to them. And so rather than their leader, after we shared these concerns, stepping up and stepping in and acknowledging, hey, I have not developed this leader so that they can develop you. It was every other excuse under the sun, or failing to root cause what's really going on. And we leave our leaders behind in the process. Just because you're a great individual contributor or you're great at the technical does not mean you, one, aspire to leadership, and two, that you're going to be great over people like you are over process. And we talked about that people over process, but that's a lot of, for me, that's most of what I've seen in my experience.
Yeah, I think that's so important, like the fact that just because you're good at one thing does not mean you're automatically a leader, like you said. And I think for me, in my experience, what I've seen is that we're so focused on the symptom that we're not looking at the root cause. So I come from a police dispatching background. And as you know, police departments around the country have a lot of issues going on right now with how they handle things and who they employ. And so for me, when I hear it's just, a few bad apples. I've heard this a lot of times. And I've also kind of seen it in corporate too. There's just a few bad apples. Yes, there are, but we have to start looking deeper at these things. Who created this bad apple? Were they a bad apple before they got into the police department? Or what is the soil? What is the seed? What is the ecosystem that's growing these bad apples? So the same thing with leaders. I think companies are so focused on the symptoms that they're not really addressing the root cause of, like Tiffany said, are you setting up these leaders for success? What ecosystem are these leaders living in that allows them to continue to perpetuate things that are unhealthy? So I definitely agree with that. I think, we focus so much on just symptoms that we're not addressing the root cause, which is continuing. And I'd love to hear what you think, Akua, about how these things continue and what companies may need to realize as they move through this process.
Yeah, both of you, I think, incredibly well said. I was nodding my head a lot. I always nod my head a lot, but I was very much like, yes. And I think that this concept of individual contributor to like inspiring leader, it's something that I've been playing around with, recently, because I definitely feel like I'm one of those humans that sort of fell into leadership. It wasn't something that I was expecting to do, sort of just fell into it, and then just realized that my normal way of operating wasn't going to cut it. And I think that sometimes it does take you being shocked, hitting that brick wall for you to want to make a change. But unfortunately, we do also have very big corporations and organizations where, it's going to take more than just one person to have a huge impact. It's going to take, right, that system or that institution really shifting how they incentivize people to make a change, right? It shouldn't just be that something happens, it gets leaked in the news, and then we're going to hire this person to change all these amazing things, or change all these things so they become amazing. So I would say that, once again, I come from, the startup space. So on an individual level, each individual has a huge impact on the bottom line. And so recognizing that can help shift some behavior. But in larger organizations, it's once again getting that feedback and recognizing that the way you show up, the way you engage, how you talk to people, how you interact with people or don't interact with people can lead to some real issues for your company. And so that's where I think it comes down to sort of OKRs or KPIs or what goals look like. I think that if companies start to think about people as I mean, they are individuals, but they're also connected. And I think that as companies become, a lot more team focused, as things become a lot more integrated, my hope is that KPIs, OKRs, however you define how you want to get something done and your expectations, should also become a little bit more sophisticated in that way as well. So it recognizes the importance of having those conversations, engaging, and being able to do it effectively and efficiently as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think it is important to remember that we're all kind of connected in the workplace, and how do we measure this as well is something that I've been hearing from both of you. Is companies need to make sure that they're measuring things accurately so they understand what is actually going on versus just what is being told to them from a leader. So I think that's also very important. And I would love to just hear any last thoughts that you have about, the cycle of leadership, breaking the cycle, things to look for that can help kind of start moving corporations and companies in the right direction. So whoever would like to go first.
I'll go. We can keep it, on our same cadence. One of the things I think is allowing people a voice. So it seems to have become somewhat of a buzzword to say there's a psychologically safe workplace, but there is something to that. We want people going home in the safety culture. They say this a lot too. We want them to go home the same way or better than they came in. We don't want people leaving with harm from the workplace. And there's so much trauma that comes from these toxic workplaces. It drives up healthcare. It impacts the bottom line. People don't come to work. They're not engaged and productive when they're at work. The business case stands the test of time. And yet we have not figured out to just treat people like humans. That's what it basically boils down to, just being a good human and being open, being inclusive. So, a lot of organizations want to stick a little sticker up and say, oh, we hired, this ethnicity or this gender. Now we're diverse. Look at us. Look at us. We hired all these women into leadership. Great. Where are the people of color? And so I think it makes a difference what your values are and what you stand for. And as candidates, I urge people to look into these things and really probe into the culture, because you don't want to find that out when you get there. And if you do find yourself in that situation, it's back to all the things we said: have the conversation, use your EAP, and really just I just have to urge people, use your voice and don't stick in an environment that's like that, because it's unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think so many people have been told that, your first few opportunities might be unhealthy, right? So like this idea of being an entry level individual in many different industries, I mean, we can pick one, right? It's going to be unhealthy. And I don't think that's necessarily the truth. It doesn't have to be. Why do we continue to allow these environments to be unhealthy? And if anything, we celebrate them, right? Investment banking. I mean, I can think of so many, that's sort of celebrated, unfortunately, right? So just recognizing that just because we've done it for this long doesn't mean we have to continue it. So one of the things I love to talk about is I love telling leaders sort of just the idea like, okay, dear leader, the people that work for you or with you are not you. And it sounds like such a simple thing, but it's something I always forget myself, right? Just recognizing that the way I make decisions, the way I communicate, the way I engage, the way, you know, I set my expectations or give feedback is not necessarily the way somebody else will, and they might not always take it in the same way. So just recognizing that we all are individuals, right? Working on that emotional intelligence, working on that self-awareness so we can better gauge how others will respond. And if they do respond in a negative light, we're also able to, once again, be able to engage with that and recognize that, you know, we don't always have complete control over how someone responds. But right, we can still engage with it and not sort of just, you know, block it out or say, oh, this is not what I need to do, or you shouldn't be emotional, this is work, right? That is not creating the type of environments that we want to have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think both of you just hit it like right on the head, and in that we need to understand that we have unique, diverse individuals that work for us, and what are the systems we have in place to help make them successful. And I think you both hit on an important point as well, is that as employees, we shouldn't be expected to save anybody or save the corporation. I think, you know, one thing that I heard was like, well, maybe you could fix it. Yeah, maybe I could, but at what cost? I think we have to start understanding that it's not up to our individual employees to change the ways that organizations run. It's up to us to make sure that the organizations are running for them, and in a way that supports a healthy life, a healthy ecosystem in and out of work. And so I think you both hit on that perfectly, is that we need to make sure that we're kind of understanding we have humans that work for us, not machines. And if we are saying that we are a family, well, then we need to start treating people as we would a family member. So I think, yeah, I think we both, all of you hit it on the head. And I've been enjoying this conversation on the cycle of leadership. This is part 2, so stay tuned for part 3, and we'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.